know Joe's got some really heavy duty notes. If anybody's ever listened to an episode of Reaction Chats, knows for a fact that me and Mark never use notes.
No notes.
No notes. So somebody's going to sound very well prepped, and there'll be me and Mark, who just sound like an episode of Reaction Chats.
Enough prevaricating, Mark.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me
Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of Making Tracks Reaction Chat, brought to you by those fine folk over at fanthatracks.com. So I said on the last episode where we had of the Acolyte that we would do a wash-up episode, and here we are. And I think I alluded to, and if I didn't, I might have teased on another episode that we were going to get a special guest in. And so obviously joining me this week, as always, is a man, the myth and legend, Mr. Mark Newbold. But we're kind of returning the favour a little bit because both me and Mark have been on the Rule the Galaxy podcast, not once, but twice, at least in my case. Mark's probably been on it like 8 or 9 times and can tell you exactly when, where, and for how long he probably was on each episode. So this week we have a pleasure, that is, of being joined by Mr. Joe Mulinaro, one of the joint hosts of Rule the Galaxy, the lead host. How do you want to title yourself, sir?
I'm the one who's been around the longest, I guess you would say. My son started the podcast in January of 2020. He parted ways with us shortly after that, and I took it over. So there's 4 of us that are regularly on the show, and I'm just the one who's been punishing myself the longest.
Yeah. Bit like Mr. Newbold there. He's the one who kind of like carries across and drags the network, both the news and the podcast, kind of through, like kicking and screaming at times, so we get an episode out. So basically what I thought was, just so more for you, Joe, because in case you haven't had a chance to listen to Reaction Chats, me and Mark tend to try and jump on to record as soon as we can after the episode. Ideally, in a sense of like not having had a chance to see, read, or listen to anybody else's thoughts or opinions. And so I kind of thought it'd be quite nice to do like a kind of wash-up episode, as we call it in post anyway. So like after the dust has settled a little bit, after the production's been finished and everybody's had a chance to kind of collect their thoughts a little bit and maybe, I don't know, have a chance to even review or revisit some of the episodes, I thought it'd be great to just have a chat about the Acolyte, because especially for me, I think it's been up and down for the most part. So I have no real kind of prep. So I'm basically going to start off with this one. Well, 2 questions for one. One, Kathleen Kennedy described the Acolyte as Kill Bill meets Frozen. So 1, is that a fairly accurate description for the series? And 2, if you had to tell the next person who comes into this suite and describe to them what the Acolyte is in as few words as possible, how would you do it? And I'll let Joe think about that for a minute and let Mr. Newbold go first, because...
Thanks for that. Well, I think Frozen and Kill Bill together makes Thrill Bill. So I think that actually describes the Acolyte perfectly well. And if I had to describe the Acolyte in as few words as possible, I would say watchable, engaging, and sequelable, as in I want to see more of it.
I could get behind that, I think.
I like that. And just because I've just seen the Deadpool Wolverine movie, Frozen is fresh in my head because of Ryan Reynolds loving to sing that theme song in there to go along with Papa from, what movie was that? Yentl or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
So that was in my head. I would say there are definitely things leaning towards both of those, Frozen and Kill Bill. My crew actually threw some titles together for me as we were talking about it and discussing it. And like you guys saw, I did write down some notes just because I wanted to sound as professional as you, because our show is thrown together with shoestrings, bubble gum, and rubber bands. But
Rubber bands, yeah.
so looking at it, I felt like it was more of a Twilight Star Wars. I felt like that was where I was. And one of my co-hosts coined the phrase, the Hannah Montana of Star Trek. And I thought that was interesting. But to go along with Mark's follow-up, I would agree. It was watchable. It was something that we all wanted to be very good. We wanted this to be a new direction that the storylines could go down. But I would say because of the way they ended it with the cameos and so forth, and leaving some things not tied up, I am all for seeing a second season of it. But it wasn't, unfortunately, it wasn't one of my favorites. But I did enjoy the week by week and the flashbacks of the prequels and different things like that were in there. So it had its goods. It had some not so goods, but I would watch a second season of it for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I would kind of, I'd agree with both of you on that, really. I mean, there was definitely, for me, definitely the Kill Bill vibes was a lot more overt in the first kind of half of the series. And I guess, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not Ryan Reynolds, so I've probably only seen Frozen maybe once or twice. So I wasn't necessarily picking that up, but I did see the honest trailer for The Acolyte the other day, and they called it Sifter Sister, which I don't know if either of you guys watched the Nickelodeon series from like the late 90s, I'd say.
Yeah.
And so that was that's where I was kind of like leaning with that. But I think you're right. I mean, it definitely had in its construction, more of a kind of, I'd say a YA, young adult kind of vibe. And that's not necessarily just based on, say, like Twilight and stuff like that, but even like some of the novels, even the High Republic novels that we kind of get, I have got that similar kind of vibe. And I mean, I watched the new Hunger Games on the weekend, so the prequel to that. And again, it's kind of like there's a tone about it where it's like some things like, big dramatic things aren't actually as dramatic as like obviously the emotions. They really kind of try to channel the emotions. The problem is for me with The Acolyte, and actually, funnily enough, I've talked to my nephew about this the other day, who's 14. And even he kind of said, and I am completely paraphrasing because I'm not a 14-year-old, but like he didn't quite get what the motivations of the characters were at times. He didn't feel like it kind of just meandered around and didn't, wandered around a little bit about that. So, that's,
One of my key points about that and going down that path was, and yes, it's in my notes. I really felt like when you compare something like The House of the Dragons and how they're an hour-long episode, and sometimes there's minutes of non-discussions, right? It's really walking through scenes and the depth of that. I think the show could have done more if they would have been longer episodes, more in depth, feeling the backstory and the things going on in the person's mind instead of trying to rush through some of the things they rush through. I don't know if you guys see it the same way or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think sometimes, especially considering the budget they've got, which is significant budget, and it's Star Wars, and they know that fans love to live in the world. We love going back to Tatooine and sitting in that world. Going back to Mos Espa and Book of Boba Fett was fascinating. Just going back to places is interesting. And so, as you said, I've not seen House of the Dragon season 2 yet. I'm desperate to get to that because I love season 1. But yeah, they do. They let you roam around in the world a little bit, and you really get a sense of the geography. Whereas with Star Wars, it's a galaxy. It's not just a world; it's a galaxy. So you don't really, generally, outside of places like Tatooine, Coruscant, and a handful of other places, you don't really get to revisit that many locations. So I want to see as much of them as I can when I'm there, because outside of the odd book or comic or something years later, or like say maybe a sequel season, you might not get there again. You might not visually get there again. You probably will in a book, but not visually. So I want to see more of it. And that ILM would design the absolute heck out of anywhere these are craftsmen working on these shows, so it's going to look amazing. So I totally agree. I want to see more of that. That's something I feel is lacking, because whereas you say you get hour-long episodes with a lot of other seasons or shows, most of these episodes you're scraping 40 minutes with credits. It's not long enough, really.
Yeah, it did seem like they kind of, okay, House of Dragons has this good knack, a bit like, you remember like West Wing, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You just have a walk and talk scene. It's basically, we're going to go from one room in the White House to the other side of the White House, and we're just going to talk. And basically, that's the exposition, but you're seeing the environment. And that's where they do that really well with Game of Thrones. Sometimes they just have somebody walk into a room, and the whole thing just happens in a room, And actually, in the second season, a ton of stuff happens, but you have these episodes where actually you get to the end and like nothing really has, on the big scale has happened. There's not been any battles, but it's just building the foundations,
edging
underneath.
It up,
ramping it up. But Andor did that pretty well, but the Andor did that on a compressed scale because it was 3 episodes, whereas like a series like Game of Thrones, which is a lot more complex, and the character relationships are a lot more complex, and there's a lot more kind of nuance that we seem to, which I think actually Star Wars could totally support given the opportunity. But I think you'd need to kind of almost slow the pace down a little bit, where I think there is that problem, which is inherent in Star Wars for the most part, that is like, everything needs to kind of, feel like it's moving on very quickly. It's almost like they're worried that we'll get bored. But actually, to your point, Mark, I don't think we will. I think a lot of people would be like, well, this is cool. We're seeing this planet, because we only see very small sections. And I've been jumping around some of the Mandalorian and stuff like that, just randomly watching episodes. And you can see over across like 2 or 3 episodes, and even like with Kenobi and that, there's a limitation to the scale of a set. And then suddenly you ramp up to a $250 million budget like you have with Andor, and the sets are bigger. You live in the world a little bit more. And you're like, wow. And so that then made me question, well, actually, really, does Star Wars really work on that smaller scale these days? Or are we never going to get what we think we want until we see it back on the big screen?
Well, I think you mentioned YA as maybe being the core to this show. And I'm okay with that. We talk about it all the time. There's different entry points for every Star Wars fan. And if it brings in a whole new fan base, being a YA-based show, great. I'm all for it. But also talking about, you brought up Andor. Andor was one that originally I was not that hip with, right? It took a little bit of grinding, but I think that exposition and that buildup and that depth and the scenery and everything really got to me, to where now Andor is one of my favorite things that Star Wars Disney has done. I think I was just expecting it to be Rogue One, like go action, this and that, and instead it built a story. And now I cannot wait for season 2 because of what it has built. And this show, while I think there could be a good season 2, if they would have gone deeper into it, lengthen these more, I think people would be chomping at the bit for it.
Hi, this is Dorian Kinji, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
I agree with that. And to both your points about tonally, if this is YA, if Young Jedi Adventures is for kids, if Andor is a bit more thoughtful for sort of late teens and everybody onwards, because let's be honest, if you're anything past 15 years of age and is still into Star Wars in any level, it's a bonus. So we say this a lot, but you're right. I've said this for a long time, that whole entry point of Star Wars, we all came in at different points, and we all came in on different things. And that's unique to everyone's entry to Star Wars is generally quite unique for the most part, unless they've never seen or read or heard anything of Star Wars until they walked into the cinema and their first experience was Revenge of the Sith or Attack of the Clones or whatever it might be. And you go on from there. But yeah, I think Star Wars can stand to do many of these things. And tonally, Acolyte wouldn't work if it was made like Andor, and Andor wouldn't work if it was made like Acolyte. So they're all unique in their own spaces. And also they're all in unique eras as well. So I kind of like the light and shade of that. And I know we just found out Skeleton Crew's coming out 3rd of December in the States, 4th of December here, with the time difference. And that's only, a matter of a few months away now. that's going to feel completely different. You
Yeah.
can't imagine a character from Acolyte or Andor walking into the cast of Skeleton Crew. Maybe you could. I don't know. I mean, that was always Robert Downey Jr.'s thing, wasn't it? Back in the day. How are you going to have a guy who's got a metal suit coexist in a world where there's a magician with a red cape? That's not how are we going to make that work? And then they do the Avengers and it works brilliantly. So It can happen.
Right. Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, actually, the other day, I don't know, because it was a post on social media, but somebody had a screen grab of a shot from Skeleton Crew, and literally just said, "Oh, so they're making Star Wars for kids now," and it's just like,
you groan.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hope that was,
thing. Yeah.
I mean, you kind of hope that was actually somebody like doing it tongue in cheek, but I think this is a
Probably
thing
not.
with a horrible, and forgive me for saying this, with the fact that like there isn't, probably a predominantly aging fan base in Star Wars. They need to get the kids in.
They do.
Because I think if you get the kids at the right age, then you've pretty much got a fan for life, even if they don't necessarily collect and go to conventions and stuff. But as long as you've got bums on seats, either in Disney Plus or cinema, it's easier to do that at formative years. Whereas like when you try and become a fan of something older, you just bring so much more baggage and it just doesn't quite work in the same way.
That's a really good point. There is a pathway though, isn't there? You can kind of see if kids come in on Skeleton Crew, it's very easy for, if it's your nephew or kid or whatever, and they love Skeleton Crew, it's like, go and watch Rebels, you'll love Rebels, or go and watch Resistance, probably Resistance, you'll love Resistance, and then Rebels, then Clone Wars, or watch if it's a younger fan, go watch Forces of Destiny. They're really short, but they're fun and snappy. You can kind of see how you could hook them in. There is I know chronologically it doesn't work in that sense, but just getting them into Star Wars as a whole, because the chronology doesn't matter to kids.
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with somebody yesterday at work who's got I'm an 8-year-old boy who hasn't seen Star Wars, but is a massive Star Wars fan because of Lego, right? So and the games, and it's and I'm like, and I hear that quite often, quite regularly by my friends. They're like, "Oh, yeah, we've not shown it. We'll be holding off watching Star Wars normally until they've spoken to me, so I can instruct them as to what exactly episode to watch." I'm like, well, obviously start with The Last Jedi.
But the last 10 minutes of Revenge of the Sith, show that to your 6-year-olds.
Exactly. But the thing is, I mean, to your point, I kind of said, well, look, there's such a wide variety now, and if they're into animation and if they're into cartoons, for lack of a better term, Resistance, Rebels, or even maybe Clone Wars. But I said, and he says, but is that jumping around the timeline? I said, well, to be fair, kids kind of they just accept that at face value, that kind of stuff, and it'll be the characters that they like.
It's amazing because SpongeBob SquarePants, hard to believe, is 25 years old. I have a daughter who's 22, and I think to myself, there's no way this has been out that long. No. But yet, like you mentioned, the timeline thing, we'll flip on and have that on some point with our kids around, our grandkids. There's no timeline. There is no. The kids just jump in, and if it's animated and it's fun and it draws their interest, they really wouldn't care. They'd be happy to hop around from those timelines.
I was convinced that there must have been about 200 odd episodes of Ewoks when I was younger, because it always seemed like I was seeing a new one, and there was just this continual kind of like slew of episodes of Ewoks. And that's clearly not the case, but
it's like Monkey, isn't it? There's only 13 episodes of Monkey, and you're convinced there was like dozens. It was like one of those Japanese shows that was on for 20 years. No, there's just 13 episodes of Monkey. That's all there is.
Yeah. So, but that's the thing. I mean, I think for me, speaking of episode numbers, like 8 episodes for the series felt about right, but I think they needed a little bit more of it. I think, or they needed to maybe just merge them and just go, do you know what? We'll just have a mini series. Let's have 6 episodes and combine a couple. I mean, I did quite like some of the juxtaposition they did with day and night and all these kind of plays and stuff, which is more subtle than I think we're used to. But I just feel like it was almost just not quite, on so many levels. But there were so many good characters that they just decided to kill off. That's my biggest problem.
Well, and so I will throw out there some things that, because I have some different things where probably are a little deeper conversations, but some of the easy things to talk about just to start, the characters that I found myself drawn to were Jecki and Yord. I initially Saul was my guy, but he started fading from my favorability by the end. But Jackie and your Chimere, believe it or not, even though I'm a good guy kind of guy, I just liked how he was written. I liked how his introduction was and where he was in the story. And then the other thing that I really liked outside of the characters was I thought this was the best Disney lightsabers battles that we've gotten. So on this show, those are some of the things I really enjoyed. I can't stand that Jackie and Yord were taken out, and if there is a season 2, unless there's flashbacks, they won't be in it. But that's where I kind of stand on things that really like drew me to it and that I liked.
Well, I like that. On the flip side of that, and I completely agree, and I pretty much agree with your assessment of all the characters, actually, is that I enjoyed Yord because I like the banter between Jackie and Yord. I like the relationship between Jackie and Sol, and so all of that was well set. And I like the fact that so many films, I'm a Trek guy. Star Trek Into Darkness annoys me still to this day. I was at the premiere. It still annoys me to this day that they just remake. Mark's heard this a million times. They remake Wrath of Khan, and there's nothing's earned. And in the space of 2 hours, they're trying to make you cry like you've watched 69 episodes of the original series and waited 25 years for this film, whatever it was. And, it just wasn't earned. And so, but you got to this, and in a very small space of time, you actually cared about Jackie and Yord. I did. I know Mark wasn't a massive fan of Yord, but I think we all liked Jackie, or grew to like Jackie, And so when that happened, especially Jackie, that proper caught me on the hop. So, but I like that because I wasn't expecting it. And sometimes you can know too much. We go into these things kind of almost confident that we kind of know where it's going to go. And when things happen, you kind of think, I kind of get it. I didn't see any of that. So I appreciated it for the fact that it was ballsy enough to throw me off my game almost as a viewer. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, because like on one hand, you had like, I think what was a fairly well telegraphed kind of Chimere being the baddie.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you've got like, I mean, you know, if you were to put money on any character surviving to the end, you would probably have put Yord and Jackie above Sol, to be honest. I think, I mean, I liked the kind of the tragedy of Sol. It kind of felt a little bit, Shakespearean, kind of like, you literally just watching this kind of like this great, like, pillar of virtue and this paragon and that just kind of like basically just suddenly like unraveling like on camera.
You just say, sorry, Mark, you just saying that just made me think of Plagueis, of Palpatine going, has anyone ever told you the tragedy of Darth Plagueis? And you saying that, I'm just thinking as you saying it to a Jedi, Yoda going, tell you, did they, the tragedy of Master Sol? Because it is kind of, it does feel like that.
Yeah.
It's Shakespearean, isn't it, the way it goes?
There's a lesson there for Jedi, to learn. And that's it. And I think, this is a thing. Sometimes, we look at Star Wars, we can look at it face value. Then when we get a bit of time to live with it a little bit more and let it breathe, that's when you start to go back and go, actually, do you know what? Yeah, it wasn't so bad. I mean, Yord, I just found Yord quite a two-dimensional character, but that's fine because there's quite a few two-dimensional characters in there. Like a lot of the apprentices were two-dimensional characters, but I think that's because they're young and they haven't really found their own identity within like the Jedi kind of community. They're all very much kind of like carbon copies of whoever's trained them or whoever their master is, and reading through the Jedi code and stuff. So then suddenly it's when they're not until they're out in the real world, in the galaxy, that they can have to realize, we can't quite necessarily operate, in a black and white kind of way. And
that's one thing that the High Republic books have done really well, is that the characters are very well drawn and well defined, and they've all got tenure pretty much, haven't they? Most of them. You've got Bel Zettifar, who's kind of finding his feet in the early phases, and now he feels like a character who's earned his stripes. But there's a lot of younger characters in the YA books, which I haven't read a lot of the YA High Republic stuff. But the older characters, like Loden, who goes out in the first book, who felt like Sol feels like the Qui-Gon of his era. Loden felt like the Qui-Gon of his era as a parallel, and he went out in the first book, and it's like, oh my goodness, you felt that in prose. So they've drawn the characters really nicely in that sense.
If you think about it, Star Wars and Lucasfilm has been doing this ever since Obi-Wan Kenobi. Here's the leader from that movie where you're thinking he's going to be the one that leads them through, and boom, cut down. And yes, it was made a change, right in the middle of the filming and everything like that. But still, following that trend all the way through, Soul kind of follows in that path.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and you could always put Luke in those boots in Last Jedi, couldn't you? In a way.
Yeah, well, like in some respects, it's like Obi-Wan was almost like the original cliche for that kind of that whole kind of trope, really, when you think about it. At least for like modern cinema.
So, and you get that Marsha Lucas for that, can't you? So.
Yeah, thanks, Marsha. Yeah,
said Sir Guinness to nobody.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, he still got his residuals. He was fine.
Oh, he was happy. He was happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to your point about the combat, I really quite like the combat. I mean, obviously the combat had a very, very strong style, which I quite liked, but I think it kind of showed Jedi in a slightly fantastical kind of way. But yeah, it felt believable. It felt more believable than if I was to watch a samurai movie. Like if I watch Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and they start running up trees and floating across rooms. Even though I know that's a trope of a genre, but
stylized.
I kind of wish we had maybe more of this in maybe some earlier Star Wars as well. But even maybe just not necessarily everybody fight like that, because it just feel like there was like one tonal kind of like style for this series for the combat, and I kind of wish there was maybe a little bit more,
This felt more like Force Unleashed than Force Awakens, didn't it? The dialing up of the powers. It felt like they were tuning into powers that later generations don't seem to either get trained in or have access to or are able to do.
Yeah.
Well, and we're coming out of the High Republic era when, I mean, it's called that because they're supposed to be at the height of their powers, right? So this is the tail end of that, but still that fight style battle, whatever, we don't see that through the original trilogy really at all. And we don't see it again until the prequels when we have some more action, Obi-Wan, Darth Maul, where it was kind of ramped up like that, right? But yeah, I agree. It stood out to me to where I thought, looking back at, whether it was Andor, whether it was Mandalorian, Ahsoka, those kind of things, all that seemed less stylized than these seem.
And it's almost like when you look at the prequels, and George was like, for George's time, the Jedi, the prequels were the peak that it had ever been, as far as he was concerned. So look at these guys, look at Anakin and Obi-Wan go in Revenge of the Sith, or look at Maul and Obi-Wan go in Phantom Menace. That's the peak of the era. And then you look at Luke in Empire, and almost Rey in Force Awakens again. I go back to that, just hack and slash, just swing and hope. They're not trained really, so they're just giving it their all. They're just batting away like a baseball player. Whereas when you see the trained skills of a Jedi in as you say, Acolyte or the prequel era, the difference is, it levels up.
One of the things that Alfie on our show talks about is the comment that Yord makes about Chimere. He doesn't follow the same fighting styles. He doesn't follow along with these. He fights differently. And we started discussing, at that time, the Jedi basically just needed to show up with a lightsaber, and it intimidated most enemies or bad guys enough to where they just set down their guns and run, right? Yeah. I mean, or you slash and dash and take out a laser and you're done. When you're fighting somebody because who do they practice against? Themselves? And they practice against themselves doing the same typical things.
Yep.
So this Chimere really throws a wrinkle in that.
Yeah, which I think that is something that is, I hope they explore more. Is kind of like, how do you counter like fighting a Jedi? Obviously,
well, it makes you wonder where Dr. Huyang was in this era, doesn't it? Because you see him training in the Ahsoka series with Sabine and Ahsoka and such, and Ahsoka's got her own training programs with Anakin, and so there's like you say, there's that set training of or set levels of training sort of thing, but there's nothing sporadic. And you just think back to Han Solo in A New Hope. Good against the living is what good against remotes is one thing, good against the living that's something else kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think that that's just a good story point to develop and build on. I think really, and I think it's something that, I mean, it was kind of a throwaway comment really by Yord to an extent, but I think you could explore more into it and actually, how because it's quite interesting how are the Jedi being perceived in this era, and we're kind of starting to be read into the fact that there's under a lot of scrutiny by the Senate, and all that, which I think is going to be a fascinating thing that I hope they build on for season 2, because that I think really will lead us and make a big link with what we see in Phantom Menace.
Yeah, that was one of my favourite scenes with Senator Rayancourt coming into Vanessa and kind of just laid it down for her, and she was quite put out that she'd been questioned, and I liked the fact that the Jedi were a little bit nose out of joint, because we know where that goes. They end up, because of Palpatine's machinations and presumably Plagueis to a degree, they're the puppets of the Republic, which makes them the puppets of the Empire, and then they're eradicated for the most part. I've just reviewed issue 1 of Inquisitors, and you're watching the fallout of that. The massive fallout of Order 66. It's not as cut and dried as we thought, which is great for storytelling and auxiliary stuff. But to see somebody from the Senate with the right intentions, why have you got all this power? Why who marshals you? And she's, because she knows no different. So, well, with the Jedi, But as we learn in this area, there's all these other not force cults, but force followings and other stuff that's happening at the same time. It just happens that the Jedi have always been the prevalent one. So I think that's fascinating. I hope she gets to dig into it more.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
I had, based on you bringing up that Senator Vanessa, one is, when it comes to her, does she end up, in your eyes, becoming almost a villain in this show by the end? Because that's the way I felt, to where she was kind of the one pulling some strings that didn't sit right with me in the Jedi Order. And then 2, I brought this up, so totally different thing, but similar, I guess. I think I brought it up to Mr. Mulcaster when we were doing a show recently. One of my favorite lines of Angels and Demons is when the right-hand man to the Pope says to Robert Langdon, religion is flawed because man is flawed. And I look at the Jedi and I see them as, they are people, they're beings, but they're flawed because they are those beings. But being flawed doesn't mean to be bad. When you look at most institutions, whether it's in England, whether it's in the U.S., they are flawed. I mean, we can all say that, whether it's governments, religions, police, they're flawed, but it doesn't make it to where the entire thing is wrong or bad. And I feel like this show, it didn't do it 100%, but it was definitely pushing down that envelope, that rail, that the Jedi were kind of the bad guys. Like, it was, what they were doing was wrong, when really it was some mistakes, some bad decisions, and some flaws that made them that way. So 2 totally different topics there. 1, Vanessa, and then 2, did you feel like it was kind of going that way with the Jedi being the baddie in this situation?
I mean, this is a thing, is that, like you said, I think, good people make mistakes. And I think it's always going to come down to motivation at the end of the day, isn't it? Why are you doing these? And even that sometimes, it comes back down to that elegantly written exchange in The Acolyte. The Jedi are good, the Jedi are bad. It's, I mean, but it kind of does, doesn't it? It's because it's perspective, it's a point of view. The police are bad if you're like lower, like economic kind of society, or like an ethnic minority, and they're good if they're the ones who come in to save people and exactly, clean up a mess or what have you. It's so if that's the thing, and I think, I mean, there's some really interesting conversations to be had about, like, where do the Jedi, or what do the Jedi see themselves as? And especially this, and I thought it's fascinating about David Harrod's character. Kind of, he even uses a term like pseudo-religious, pseudo-religious cult or clan or sect or something. And I think that is like I think it's the first time ever. Obviously we're so used to like Moff Tarkin saying, their religion died out, years ago. And now we've got somebody who's actually kind of questioning the fact, well, actually, that would suggest that you kind of like, you follow a higher power, which we could say the force is. Is a force a higher power? Is it a tool? Is it just something that they have access to, and by having access that elevates them? And I guess that's it. You go to the outer rim, you go to an undeveloped outer rim, and you move a cup with your hand or pick up your lightsaber by gesturing, you're going to be a god, unless you're 3PO. But then you go to another planet and you're going to be an oppressor, you're going to be an invader, and you're going to be somebody who's going to subjugate the locals. So it's very, it's some really interesting points you can kind of dive into with this.
And I think with Vanessa as well, when Sol is dead and she sort of leans down and sort of strokes his chest, says, "Sorry, my friend," sort of thing.
Patsy.
You're the Patsy, exactly. You're the Patsy. And she goes back and basically says, we have this rogue Jedi, Master Sol went off message, and it's a one-off thing. It was just this guy, and she lets him take the fall. And that we know that Kamir is her Padawan. Yeah. And that clearly a lot of the blame, a lot of the fallout comes on her. She's covering her own bases. So if there's a villain, it's not the Jedi. At the moment, you've got to point your finger to her.
Yeah, it's 101 politics at the end of the day. You cover your ass and you blame the other guy.
Yeah.
And you blame the dead guy, or you blame the outgoing government. It's the same kind of thing. Oh yeah, they left the economy in such a state. It's not what we're doing, it's what they did. We picked up with this. And it's kind of that, isn't it? And I suppose on one level, she's a villain, but then it's very easy for her, I guess, to turn around and say, I'm doing this to protect, that so we don't get this oversight and we don't suddenly kind of find out we can't look out for the galaxy in the way that we've been doing, and we can't wade into somebody else's kind of like ascendancy kind of like ceremony and take their children away because we think that they're bad,
and she only goes to see Yoda at the very end, literally the last frame is like, I can't not escalate this now.
Exactly. You kind of think at that point she's like, crap, I'm gonna have to go see the big dog now, aren't I?
And gosh, guys, I mean, when we talk about a season 2, it doesn't really like get you stoked to sit there and go, what exactly is she going to tell Yoda? Because if we look at the Phantom Menace and we look at the discussions that are had, he can't go into this thinking that there's a Sith or Dark Jedi or anything like that out there. He's got to kind of be the guy, because if not, it changes the entire way we look at him in the prequels, right? I mean, if he knows this, does he sit there and go,
I don't know. I think he sits on a lot of stuff. So him knowing stuff, wouldn't surprise me at all. Because we know, Obi-Wan only ever tells stories from a certain point of view, and he's one of our uber heroes. So him, Yoda knowing something, I'm sure that, we know there's things that governments know that the public don't know, and there's things that go on that we never even have a sniff of. So I think this is one of those need to know things. And whilst I don't think Ki-Adi-Mundi is in that need to know circle, I think Yoda probably is. I think Mace probably is. There's that little look between the two of them in Phantom Menace. So I think there's certain Jedi that are, I know recently, Joe, you visited Italy and did your trip to Italy, and you think of the Vatican. And there's always been the thing of there's certain areas where there's certain scriptures and certain books and certain information that we will never know about, we don't need to know about, but have been carefully curated and put to one side. You think Yoda and Mace are the two guys that go into the library at Hogwarts to the forbidden section and read all the books they shouldn't read and probably know all the Sith scripture and everything they shouldn't know, and they probably know most of it, and just keeping a lid on it. So I think he could know way more than he might let on that he knows, if that makes any sense.
But at the same time, I don't even think that she'll tell him the truth. No. I think she's probably gone there to kind of give him a heads up, but they're probably going to start to get investigated by the Senate. I don't necessarily think that she's going in there to say,
my Padawan's gone rogue.
Kind of screwed up a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, do you remember that dude I had as my Padawan? Well, the funny thing is, I think that's, from a story point of view, I think, it would be far more interesting just to see the lie just kind of build, just just get bigger, you know?
Sorry, mate. I've just had an idea. I'm wondering, Dooku was one of the Lost 20. I'm just wondering if these come within the realms of the Lost 20.
Yeah.
Because they were Padawans, they were, and now they've gone, is the Lost Jedi, knights, or the Lost 20 Jedi knights who've turned? I don't know. I'm just wondering, there can't be huge amounts that turn.
Left the order. No, they probably didn't just leave the order. They probably maybe one or two of them left the order, like Ahsoka. But probably a lot of them, I wonder if they just turned or something. And that's how
or
they
got turned. Yeah,
exactly. And get swept under the carpet a little bit, Yeah. That's a very good point. My Kellogg's collection needs to be updated of the little gold statues.
Yes.
And do we know, did Vanessa think that Chimera was dead or that he had just left?
I don't think they've determined that yet. My gut tells me she thinks he was dead, because early on in the season, she's very much like, yeah, Sol, you go and deal with it. She doesn't know that's a threat level that's kind of bubbling up quickly. Right. I think as soon as she gets sort of a sniff that this is about to go nuclear, then all of a sudden, I'll go to Brendock. It's fine. Prepare my ship, and she gets a bit more involved. So I think initially she doesn't, but I think she kind of does eventually.
The reason I bring that up is it wasn't a thought in my mind at all until I started putting the conversations together when Osha was asking Chimera how old he was or how long back he was a Jedi, and he said a long time ago, right? Yeah. It was, and we know Vanessa is older, right? She's 100 plus years old.
Yeah.
And so when Plagueis showed up, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here, I apologize, but when Plagueis showed up, and I'm wondering if, one, she thought he was dead, two, he's back, and he was a Padawan a long time ago. Now that we know that Plagueis is so involved with creating life, bringing back life, perhaps did he do anything to Chimera to resuscitate that person back to make him into his trainee, his Sith Padawan?
Possible. It's possible. Yeah. It's possible to even looking at way ahead down the timeline to Rise of Skywalker, when you're walking through Exegol and there's like vats full of Snokes. It's really opened up the doors to the potential of, and I mean, in Dark Empire there's the Sparty cylinders and stuff like that. So you've got to think that the cloning technology wasn't just invented then. It's something that's from way back when, and obviously the Clone Wars with all the clones that were developed then, and the inference that on Kamino they'd had cloning for a while. They were known as cloners. So that throws another wrinkle in there as well. So, but I like the idea that he brought Chimera back, literally brought Chimera back.
Yeah, or maybe not necessarily brought him back, but maybe, before you can create life, maybe it's just a case of like trying to like slow down the aging process a little bit, so. It's a
Claudite and it's a shapeshifter. Remember? Yeah, we don't.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? Exactly. But I mean, I think it's cool. I mean, and obviously, I think we all agree it'd be cool to see a little bit more, maybe Plagueis and that in the season.
Oh yeah.
Or at least have it confirmed as Plagueis. At least
I think they have. I think they have.
Yeah, I think they have by now. But yeah, So I guess really that's the next question. Is there something that, like, one story thread or something that you really want them to focus on more than maybe other bits in a second season, or is there something that you think they're maybe missing that they should maybe, because Leslie Heaven says that she's going to take a bit of time, she's going to step away a little bit just to kind of, I guess, recoup, gather her thoughts, and I think even actually whether or not it's a good thing or a negative thing, and feel free to kind of weigh in on this. Listen to a little bit to the fan base and listen to like the reactions. Maybe not reaction chat, but maybe maybe rule the galaxy. So.
Well, if you want to hear off and on cursing by my co-hosts and and hear funny just jokes because we spend half our time making fun of each other instead of just talking Star Wars, feel free to check out Rule the Galaxy. But I don't think there was one particular thing that I would say cut that off. We don't need to follow that storyline. I'm fine with the Vanessa following Chimera. I'm fine with now using May to maybe be the bait to get her back to Osha and Chimera. I think those are both good storylines. Plagueis, obviously, Plagueis is a book or a novel that all of us probably love or like quite a bit. So if there's things that are going to lead us down that path that will then lead us to the Palpatine story later on, I'm perfectly fine with that. And but yeah, I mean, I didn't find myself overly enthralled with the May and Osha story, only because I felt like there were so many questions left on it. If they are the same person, blah, blah, blah. I mean, okay. I was perfectly fine with them being twins and one having more of a light, one more being more of the dark, what have you. But now that we know they were created on this planet where there was this divergence, I guess I'd like to see where that goes because, it could lead to some things. But in the end, I guess it doesn't. Most of these characters are going to make it to the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy. So if that tie-in is Plagueis and that line going through that direction, I'm fine with that. So
yeah, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? I think also maybe they were pretty wise that they didn't actually nail down exactly what the whole May Osha kind of thing was as such. It's not, I mean, like I said in the episode 8 wrap up, I was like, when they hugged at the end, I almost expected them to kind of like merge into one another.
Yes.
Like, for like Star Trek motion picture kind of thing or something. Or I'm not even going to mention what I said at the time, an episode of Deep Space Nine. But but yeah, I mean, I think if they make the episodes a little bit longer, if they can do that in a way whereby it doesn't feel like they're filling. So I think they could be a little bit more kind of open to actually jumping around between, having an A and a B and a C plot and actually having all episodes, all of these kind of things. And for me, I would really quite like to get through a whole series of Star Wars now in the Disney Plus era with not really much of a flashback, because I feel like they have used that as a crutch a little bit too much. Now it's like, okay, so flashbacks are a thing. Yes, great. We can just explain everything. And I think, well, sometimes a little bit of like, a walk and talk kind of expositional kind of scene can be a little bit dull, but sometimes I don't necessarily think you get the same mileage out of a flashback because we kind of know where it's going to happen. And unless they can be really clever, and I don't think they really were with the flashbacks too much, it just, I feel like it's wasting story time when you could be moving the story on, stop looking back, move on.
Well, I like that one episode. Yeah, I like that episode of Mando season 3, which was the one-off random one with Dr. Pershing and Elia Kane, and it was just its own thing. And I love that. It was like unapologetically, that's what we're telling today. And you saw all of the extra stuff on Coruscant you never got to see in Monument Plaza and all the other elements of Coruscant, which I thought was brilliant. Some people didn't like it, but I loved it. And I get what Headland was trying to do with episodes 2 and 7. The two flashback episodes, but they 3 and 7 rather, but they really sort of stood out. You just got going with these first 2 episodes, and then episode 3 was put the brakes on. We're going to go back 16 years to show you people you've never met on a planet you don't know about, and it just kind of stalled a little bit. And I thought with that, I agree that I wish the episodes were longer. That felt like there was a lot of stuff in that you could have kind of told in 15 minutes of, and I know we're talking about too many flashbacks, but they could have kind of done dotted it through the episode. Yeah, they could have dotted it through.
Yeah, exactly. If they could have done something. I mean, for example, and who's to say that it didn't happen? But when May's mind or memory gets wiped, but actually some false memories are implanted, so she doesn't have like a just big void. Actually, suddenly she's got some like history, but it's completely false. So actually, it's a third account of what happened on Brendok and that, so it really,
like Last Jedi.
Yeah, exactly. And it really ratchets up the whole kind of Rashomon kind of like vibe of it, Like you said, I don't think you need to have like the flashback episode. If you have to have a scene, I mean, Book of Boba Fett did it quite well in places, and then in other times I was just like, come on,
Yeah, bash.
Exactly.
Well, Mandalorian, when the anvil was coming down by the armor,
that was a device.
He would see the flashback. That, in my opinion, exactly. It worked because it was just a snippet, and it wet your whistle to say, I want to know what's going on there that leads to this, and it didn't pump the brakes like you mentioned and say everything you're watching, stop. We're going to just give you this. So I like that. And then the World Between Worlds Ahsoka when she went back into that and saw Anakin and
Yeah.
was the young Ahsoka again. I didn't think it took up an entire episode, right? It just took up a part of that episode, and I thought it was well done. So I'm not against flashbacks completely. No. I just think when you use one whole episode here and one whole episode there, when you should have been making 40 to 50-minute episodes, and you could have taken 10 minutes out of each one and put those in instead of just using whole episodes for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. That might be something that they change. They might be able to kind of go back and because it's not like they've started a real theme with that. They've just kind of gone, sort of, would just slot in. Maybe bit of kind of distance, and they go, actually, yeah.
And that's known now, isn't it? The 4 Jedi's actions on Brendok and the 2 sisters' history is now, it's out there now. The whole history with Mother Anastasia and all of that, it's done and known. So I can't think too much of well, they will think on it. We'll have Vanessa and Camille flashbacks, so that'll be season 2's flashback.
But even potentially, the whole inception of, May and Osha, with however they did it, So, but hey, if we have to live through a flashback episode, I mean,
we'll survive.
I think we will do. There's bigger things to deal with in the galaxy than a flashback episode. But but I mean, overall, everybody I've spoken to about the Acolyte has generally felt like one of two things: either kind of like, yeah, I thought it was really cool, or just kind of mild apathy for it, as like, and like it wasn't really my thing. So, I watched it and moved on. It's not like it was, I don't know, another series where it was like I had to really force myself to watch it, or I just couldn't watch it. It was like, the people I've spoken to, and I work in TV, Matt, who are, as critical as every single Star Wars fan, and they're not always Star Wars fan, but a lot of them were just like, yeah, I quite liked what they're doing. So, I think that's how, and I think also the population has been subdued because of the fact there's been this negative kind of pushback in review bombing and stuff like that.
Hi, this is Ethan Sachs, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
One thing that I'll keep going back to is it was a big deal to say we're going to tell this through the eyes of the Sith, or from the dark side kind of point of view. And I don't think they ever hit their full head of steam on that, because I still felt like most of it was told by the Jedi.
Yeah.
And while I am Lone Ranger, white hat guy coming in to save the day. You guys both know this when I talk to you. Obi-Wan, Luke, Rex, those are my guys, right? Out of these moral compasses who occasionally will fray off, but they really try to stay on that moral line.
High ground.
High ground. I look at it and I say the main 2 characters that I've liked outside of that, the dark things that I've read or viewed or what have you, have been the Darth Bane series and the Plagueis book. Yeah. And I look at those and I really felt like those were told from the Sith point of view. Mm-hmm. So if they would have gone all in on that, I think there would have been some more depth in this to tell it, because by the time I got to the end of both of those things, I almost was a fan of the dark side because of the way they told them, right? And for this, I'm sitting there going, who do I root for at the end of this show?
Yeah.
And that for me was a tough one, because I wanted to say, do I root for Osha now because she's doing what she's supposed to be doing per May? May said, now you can go do what you're supposed to do. But she just killed Soul, just cold-blooded, killed him right there. Am I supposed to root for her? Am I supposed to root for Chimere, who I thought was a really cool character because he's in line with Plagueis? I don't know yet. So that was where, when it left, I thought, at least maybe give me some Jedi that I could look and say, and you killed off the 2 that I liked, that I can root for them in season 2, right? And that's where it kind of left me with the end of the series.
Yeah, I don't think I could really root for Mog in season 2.
Or Basil. No, Basil, no.
Too many colloquial English accents as well. You won't have noticed it so much, Joe, but we did. It was just like watching an episode of EastEnders in parts. So it was just a bit too, Ewan McGregor does a perfectly passable plummy English accent, and that's fine. You know, it's not the best, but it's not bad. And but you know, some of the characters in this were just
They just sound like they came from the same drama school as Daisy Ridley, basically.
Yes, literally that.
John
Yeah,
Boyega.
North London. It was that. It was all. It was too much of that. But Mog, great point, because Mog was in the Outlaws, and he's the same character in the Outlaws as well.
There you go. But to your point, actually, Joe, I think actually you've kind of maybe hit it slightly like the nail on the head a little bit. I think it's very hard to have like a series that's you know, from a Sith perspective, if you're not really seeing the Sith and they're seeing stuff in the Jedi era that they wouldn't be privy to, because it kind of means that you oh, shut up, Siri.
She has an opinion. Come on, don't be like that.
Yeah. Oh, we've got a live caller. It's Siri. No. Yeah. So my point was like, yeah, I think if in season 2 you get to see more from the actual Sith perspective, not this all kind of like cloak and dagger, I'm not really like a dark side guy and I'm not hiding behind a rock, but actually the Sith, and you can actually you know, you can actually say no, the Jedi are bad and this is why. And actually, you know, you can justifiably paint the Jedi in that way. And I can be a lot more on board with actually painting the Jedi badly. Whereas this time, I just feel like they're just basically just bad middle management who've just kind of like cocked up a little bit, you know?
Yeah. And there is that arrogance that I think we said it in one of the review episodes. To me, it reminded me, certainly early on when Yord walks on board the Trade Federation vessel, you know, and it's very much like Anakin in Attack of the Clones, Jedi business, go back to your drinks, that kind of arrogance that's picked up on in Clones, and also because it's Anakin. But then you look at Yord, who comes across as the nicest, kind of almost goofy, as near to a goofy Jedi as you've got really outside of, you know, Jar Jar training to learn the Jedi art. You know, he's that kind of guy. And yet he puts on this professional, like all the air quotes, professional sort of facade. And that is quite, I mean, even Sol does it to the prisoner. You wouldn't see anybody after that just snap into just Jedi mind trick somebody. That's all. That's kind of seen as a sneaky move by Obi-Wan, really, in A New Hope. And Rey does it on instinct. She doesn't even know really how she's doing it. But every other time, it's an invasive thing. It's something Kylo does. It's not a polite, pleasant experience. And he just does it. Doesn't even ask, just does it. There's no permission.
Exactly. And I think it's like I said, it's the intent in which you do it, because like when Rey does it to FN007, it's just like, you know, it's kind of like an accident. Or actually, do you know what? It's no different from us three trying to move a remote, you know, with our mind when we're in the front room. Whereas when Sol does it, it's like kind of he's trying to, you know, rip the information out, and so therefore it becomes a violation rather than like, you know, something else. So, Jedi. Well, I think it's probably about time to wrap this episode up.
We've washed it up, have we?
I think we have. I mean, I feel a little bit more cleansed anyway. It's a good cathartic kind of process, this, you know. Because the thing is, let's be fair, all three of us are positive Star Wars fans. You know, we like more than we don't like in Star Wars.
100%.
And I think also I hate having to kind of like criticize a series in the middle of a series, because you don't know what the hell's coming for the next 3 or 4 episodes. So it gives us a chance. So before we go, I'm going to throw it to Joe. Is there anything you want to get off your chest about the Acolyte? Anything you want to just get out there before we head off?
You know what? I did have one question. Really, we've hit pretty much most things on there. It was a decent show. It wasn't a great show. It wasn't trash bin. It was right down the middle. I think they need to expand on some things to improve it for a second season if they're going to do it that way. But I did have a question for you, because I figured you two might know better than me. The helmet played a big point in this show, the Cortosis helmet, where he put in there, and, you know, do we know, does it have anything to do with the Vader series of comics, to where there's a helmet where
the mask?
I'm sorry, the mask. Yes. Do we know if it has any kind of powers like that? Because when she put it on, when Osha put it on, she changed, and he couldn't do anything to her when she had it on. So I didn't know if it had some kind of Sith powers or anything like that to that mask, or if we know.
It feels like something Dr. Apple would go digging around for, doesn't it? It's that kind of artifact.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like it's something that he kind of put together himself. So maybe it's just a little bit shonky because of that.
Well, being on that world, knowing about the cortosis.
I mean, and there. I mean, I can't remember the name of the mask in the Darth Vader comics, but that was possessed, wasn't it? Like,
by an old Sith, or something.
Yeah, like a lot of artifacts. Now, I mean, we could be wrong.
I think we said this on the episode, didn't we, Mark? Didn't we mention this about how certain artifacts are possessed by Sith spirits?
Yeah. But I almost assumed it was it's more like, basically sticking an antenna on your head and it was just amplifying whatever kind of latent, vibes you had. So I guess if a light side Jedi put it on my head, they would have a totally different experience. It's like you said, like, your experience here, see, smell nothing, and only what you take with you, basically.
There's a plot for season 2.
There you go. That's a question. It's a question for hopefully we'll get answered for season 2. However, if anybody actually does have a thought, theory, comment, or question, or an answer to Joe's question, they are more than welcome to write in, and Mr. Newbold can tell you how you can do it.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Cool. Well, brilliant. Thanks for that, buddy. Appreciate that. And Joe, thanks again for jumping on. And where can people find you if they want to either reach out to you or listen to Rule the Galaxy?
Sure. We're on all podcast platforms at Rule the Galaxy. You can email us at rulethegalaxysw@gmail.com. On Twitter/X, we are at Rule the Galaxy SW. And really, that's how we interact with most people. If you want to listen to a group of guys who just have fun and react silly and make fun of each other and talk Star Wars, that's what we're all about. Kind of like these two, except on the other side of the pond. But I do want to throw out to both of you how much of an honor and a pleasure it's been to get to know you over the past few years. And whenever I reach out, you were always willing to come on and talk and hang out with us on Rule the Galaxy. So thank you very much. It was my honor to be a part of your show today.
Oh, mate, no, it's been our pleasure. I think this will probably be the most sensible sounding episode.
By far. Yeah,
by
definitely.
far. So we'll have to get you back on for like Skeleton Crew. So cool. Right. Well, I think that is it for this episode of Reaction Chat. But until then, stay safe, take care, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.